Okay, so when you think of a successful country, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For decades, the answer was pretty simple: money. A high GDP meant a country was doing great, but is that really the whole story? Not even close. Today, we're going to explore how our whole understanding of progress has changed, moving way beyond simple economics. So, how did we get from just counting dollars to trying to understand what actually makes a life fulfilling? Let's trace that journey.
It really all comes down to this one fundamental question. Is a good life just about wealth? Or is it about things like health, education, and opportunity? This very question sparked a kind of quiet revolution in economics and policy, and it challenged decades of thinking, pushing us all to look a lot deeper. Let's see how that all unfolded.
At the heart of this revolution is this massive shift in focus. We moved from an obsession with economic growth, which is all about things like GDP, to this much broader concept, human development. And this new approach, it doesn't just look at a nation's wallet, it looks at its people. Are they healthy? Are they educated? Do they have the freedom to choose the life they want to live? These became the new benchmarks for success.
So our journey kicks off in the 1970s with a really radical new idea. Then we're going to move to the creation of a new global standard in 1990, and finally we'll see how in 2010 our tools got even more precise, allowing us to see these inequalities that were kind of hiding in the averages.
First up, the PQLI. Now this was the first major shot across the bow of traditional economics. It was a really bold claim that, our well-being can't just be found on a balance sheet.
So back in the mid-70s, an economist named David Morris introduced the Physical Quality of Life Index, or PQLI for short. And its goal was pretty radical for the time. It was like, why assume a high GDP means people are living well? Why not just, measure it directly?
And this quote from Morris himself just captures the whole philosophy perfectly. He basically argued that just because a country is rich doesn't automatically mean its people are living these great lives. He knew that if you're going to ask a different question, you need a different kind of data to answer it.
And here was his solution. Brilliant, right? Instead of income, the PQLI focused on three simple but super powerful indicators that reflected actual well-being. Can people read? Are children surviving infancy? And are people living long lives? It's simple, powerful, and completely independent of a country's bank account. It was like a direct snapshot of a nation's health and its educational foundations.
So the PQLI was absolutely groundbreaking. It proved you could measure progress differently. And that whole idea laid the groundwork for what happened in 1990, when the United Nations Development Program decided, hey, let's create a new global standard.
And this was the Human Development Index, or HDI. Just like the PQLI, its mission was to look at a country's development by focusing on its people and their capabilities. The goal was to totally change the conversation at the global level, really forcing policymakers to think not just about economic growth, but about growth that actually improves people's lives.
Now what's really interesting here is how the HDI built on what the PQLI started. It kept the focus on longevity and knowledge, health and education, but it brought a measure of income back into the picture for standard of living. The thinking was, income isn't everything, but it's a pretty important tool for achieving a good life.
For 20 years, the HDI was the gold standard. But by 2010, people were starting to realize that we needed to look even deeper. We needed to understand the inequalities within countries. The national average could look great, but what about the people being left behind? What specific barriers were holding them back? There were earlier attempts to measure poverty, like the Human Poverty Index from '97. And they were a step in the right direction for sure, but they still didn't quite capture the whole picture. It was pretty clear that to really get a handle on poverty, we needed a much sharper lens.
And this brings us to two powerful new tools that were introduced in 2010. Both of them were designed to act like a magnifying glass, exposing these hidden inequalities that a big, broad national average like the HDI might completely miss.
Okay, so the first is the Multidimensional Poverty Index, or MPI. And it's based on a really simple but profound idea. Poverty isn't just about having an empty wallet. It's about facing a bunch of disadvantages all at once, what the MPI calls acute poverty, across the most critical parts of life.
So the crucial point here is how the MPI gets incredibly specific. It looks at 10 different indicators across these three dimensions. It's not just asking, are you poor? It's asking, do you have clean water? Is there a solid roof over your head? Does your child actually go to school? Can you cook without filling your home with smoke? This gives us a much richer picture of who is being left behind, and more importantly, why.
Now, the second major index from 2010 is the Gender Inequality Index, or GII.
Its whole purpose is to put a number on a loss. It measures the human development potential a country literally throws away just by not giving women and girls the same opportunities as men and boys.
And the GII does this by looking at 3 key areas. First, reproductive health, a really critical foundation for women's well-being. Second, empowerment, which is measured by things like political representation and education. And third, economic activity, which looks at how many women are participating in the workforce. By combining these 3 areas, health, empowerment, and economic life, the GII creates this comprehensive and frankly undeniable picture of gender-based disadvantage in a society.
So, after this whole journey through 4 decades, what's the big takeaway? It's that what we measure matters. It really does. Because when you start measuring literacy rates instead of just GDP, guess what? You start building more schools. When you start measuring gender inequality, you start creating policies to close that gap. Measurement drives action.
And this path shows that evolution perfectly. We went from a simple focus on money to a broader concept of quality of life, then to this more holistic view of human potential, and finally, to a really sharp focus on the specific inequalities that are holding people back. Each step has brought us closer and closer to understanding what a good life truly means.
And that brings us right to the future. Our understanding of progress is still changing. It's not done. As we start to face these huge new global challenges, things like climate change, sustainability, and the growing importance of mental well-being, the question remains for all of us: what should we be measuring next? What's the new index we need to invent to make sure we're building a world that's not just richer, but is truly better for everyone in it?